Soon after the Bab, the herald of the Baha'i faith, declared his mission in 1844, some 400 of the most reputable scholars of Islam in Iran accepted him as being the promised Qayyim foretold in the holy books. One of the ablest ecclesiastical dignitaries of the age, and certainly one of the most formidable champions of the Babi faith, was Hujjat-e-Zanjani. Hujjat, a dynamic and independent-minded mullah who had become a Babi, took on the clerical establishment of Zanjan by decrying its immorality and abuse of power, and by issuing pointed legal decisions that were at variance with those of the other mullahs. Hujjat's position became more precarious as the Babi faith spread. Tensions mounted between Muslims and Babis, especially after the siege at Fort Tabarsi, and a street fight in Zanjan escalated into outright violence, fueled by long-standing theological divisions and new political concerns. Similar to the siege of Fort Tabarsi, Hujjat and hundreds of Babis, aided by the women, took up position in a nearby fort, and a bloody siege followed, lasting from July to December of 1850, in which Hujjat and hundreds of Babis were martyred. Among those who laid their lives was Zainab, a woman who had joined the Babi men in the fight. Among the followers of the Bab, to show qualities of fearlessness, consecration and detachment from all save God, was a village maiden who became, according to Nabil's narrative, the very incarnation of the noblest principles of human conduct to her peers. Her name was Zainab, her home a tiny hamlet in the near neighborhood of Zanjan, according to the account in Nabil's narrative. She was comely and fair of face, was fired with a lofty faith, and endowed with intrepid courage. The sight of the trials and hardships which her men companions were made to endure stirred in her an irrepressible yearning to disguise herself in male attire and share in repulsing the repeated attacks of the enemy. Donning a tunic and wearing a headdress like those of her men companions, she cut off her locks, girt on a sword, and seizing a musket and a shield, introduced herself into their ranks. No one suspected her of being a maid when she leaped forward to take her place behind the barricade. As soon as the enemy charged, she bared her sword and, raising the cry of Ya Sahibuz-Zaman, flung herself with incredible audacity upon the forces arrayed against her. Friend and foe marveled that day at her courage and resourcefulness, the equal of which their eyes had scarcely ever beheld. Her enemies pronounced her the curse which an angry providence had hurled upon them. Overwhelmed with despair and abandoning their barricades, they fled in disgraceful rout before her. Hujjat, who was watching the movements of the enemy from one of the turrets, recognized her and marveled at the prowess which she was displaying. She had set out in pursuit of her assailants when he ordered his men to bid her return to the fort and give up the attempt. No man, he was heard to say, as he saw her plunge into the fire directed upon her by the enemy, has shown himself capable of such vitality and courage. When questioned by him as to the motive of her behavior, she burst into tears and said, "My heart ached with pity and sorrow when I beheld the toil and sufferings of my fellow disciples. I advanced by an inner urge I could not resist. I was afraid lest you would deny me the privilege of throwing in my lot with my men companions." "You are surely the same Zainab?" Hujjat asked her, "who volunteered to join the occupants of the fort?" "I am," she replied. "I can confidently assure you that no one has hitherto discovered my sex, You alone have recognized me, I adjure you, by the Bab, not to withhold from me that inestimable privilege, the crown of martyrdom, the one desire of my life. Hujjat was profoundly impressed by the tone and manner of her appeal. He sought to calm the tumult of her soul, assured her of his prayers in her behalf, and gave her the name Rustam Ali as a mark of her noble courage. This is the day of resurrection, he told her, the day when all secrets shall be searched out, not by their outward appearance, but by the character of their belief and the manner of their lives does God judge his creatures, be they men or women. Though a maiden of tender age and immature experience, you have displayed such vitality and resource as few men could hope to surpass. He granted her request and warned her not to exceed the bounds their faith had imposed upon them. We are called upon to defend our lives, he reminded her, against a treacherous assailant, and not to wage holy war against him. For a period of no less than 5 months, that maiden continued to withstand with unrivaled heroism the forces of the enemy. Disdainful of food and sleep, she toiled with fervid earnestness for the cause she most loved. She quickened by the example of her splendid daring the courage of the few who wavered, and reminded them of the duty each was expected to fulfill. The sword she wielded remained throughout that period by her side. In the brief intervals of sleep she was able to obtain, she was seen with her head resting upon her sword and her shield serving as a covering for her body. Every one of her companions was assigned to a particular post which he was expected to guard and defend, while that fearless maid alone was free to move in whatever direction she pleased. Always in the thick and forefront of the turmoil that raged round her, Zainab was ever ready to rush to the rescue of whatever post the assailant was threatening, and to lend her assistance to any one of those who needed either her encouragement or support. As the end of her life approached, her enemies discovered her secret and continued, despite their knowledge that she was a maid, to dread her influence and to tremble at her approach. The shrill sound of her voice was sufficient to strike consternation into their hearts and to fill them with despair. One day, seeing that her companions were being suddenly enveloped by the forces of the enemy, Zainab ran in distress to Hujjat, and flinging herself at his feet, implored him with tearful eyes to allow her to rush forth to their aid. "My life, I feel, is nearing its end," she added. "I may myself fall beneath the sword of the assailant. Forgive, I entreat you, my trespasses, and intercede for me with my master, for whose sake I yearn to lay down my life." Hujjat was too much overcome with emotion to reply, encouraged by his silence, which she interpreted to mean that he consented to grant her appeal. She leaped out of the gate and, raising 7 times the cry of Ya Sahibuz-Zaman, rushed to stay the hand that had already slain a number of her companions. "Why befoul by your deeds the fair name of Islam?" she shouted as she flung herself upon them. "Why flee abjectly from before our face if ye be speakers of truth?" She ran to the barricades which the enemy had erected, routed those who guarded the first 3 of the defenses, and was engaging in overcoming the 4th, when beneath a shower of bullets she dropped dead upon the ground. Not a single voice among her opponents dared question her chastity or ignore the sublimity of her faith and the enduring traits of her character. Such was her devotion that after her death, no less than 20 women of her acquaintance embraced the cause of the Bab. To them, she had ceased to be the peasant girl they had known. She was the very incarnation of the noblest principles of human conduct, a living embodiment of the spirit which only a faith such as hers could manifest.